right, everybody, welcome. This is a bonus lecture by popular request. The current political setting, I generally stay out of it in my lectures, but we're in a time when talking about politics has become eminent again, and being someone who teaches a lot of ethics and politics and what is good and right and true, and what have people believed through history and history itself, what better, and I was on a website and people talk about Machiavelli, and I teach The Prince decently often. I'm using it in a class this semester. Some of you might be in that class or have watched it, and I have used Discourses on and off, Machiavelli's Discourses on Livy, and I'm going to go over it a bit. This is going to be a nice little short supplement. We'll see how long it takes. Looking at how many slides I have, probably 25 to 35 minutes, and I'll probably keep these ones shorter because they're just kind of fun for me. So if I can sneak them in from time to time, that would be great. A couple a week I think I can do. I had a lot of fun reading this book today. I read it while getting harassed by my children. It was great. They thought I was playing the whole time, so I'll take it. Okay, so we're going to get into Discourses on Livy today. Just an introduction. Let me know, guys, know how you like it. If you're one of my students, let me know. If you find me on YouTube, I'll host this, right? Post a comment, say you like it. I'll probably do a couple. I already finished the first chapter, although I probably won't finish it all today in this PowerPoint, just because I was getting excited and I just typed a bunch and it didn't go anywhere. So, all right, let's get started. So Machiavelli's Discourses, Part 1. And I tried to have nice images because Florence is beautiful, so why not talk about it? So the first chapter of this book is called... And I'm skipping the introduction, by the way. Sometimes I'll use them, but not today. Book 1, there's 3 books here, is the development of Rome's constitution. That's what this first book's about. We're going to get into it. And, all right. A couple basics if you don't know anything about Nicolo Machiavelli. I should say it right. Nicolo Machiavelli. You got to put your hand in front of your face. He wrote 2 really famous books. He wrote a bunch of books. He wrote some histories. He wrote An Art of War. But The Prince is basically the book that everybody knows about, which I've used in a class this semester, actually. It's about how to rule a principality well. It's a little mini guide. I think it's 100 and something pages. Then the second famous book is Discourses on Livy. That's the one I'm using now. This is Discourses. This is more like 500 pages. It's a big one, but it's good. And this one's about republics, or more... And republics can be principalities, but they're not absolute principalities. That's the difference between The Prince and Discourses. They are complementary. They are not exclusive. That's the best way I could say it. But yeah, we'll get into it today. And I just want to point that out as like the very short introduction on Machiavelli. He's pre-Reformation Italian, 1469. Died in, what is this? 15... Oh, no, he didn't die till 1527. So... he's Italian, Catholic, end of the Renaissance, So he lived in an exciting time. Why do you think the architecture is so wonderful? But anyway, we're going to get into this. So his book 1, his preface. What is he doing here? Well, he's trying to remind people to remember history. That's the big theme of this book. He has a big, humble introduction. But almost immediately he gets into this. Let me find the quote here. And we're going to be quoting the book a lot because although I have things to add from history and other philosophy, which I will do as we go, I think any man should be allowed to speak for himself. So here we go. He said, this is a long sentence. He's considering the honor of antiquity and how it should be addressed. He says, I notice that what history has to say about highly virtuous actions performed by ancient kingdoms and republics, by their kings, their generals, their citizens, their legislatures, and by others who have gone to the trouble of serving their country, is rather admired than imitated. Nay, it is so shunned by everybody in each little thing they do, that of the virtue of bygone days there remains no trace. It cannot but fill me at once with astonishment and grief. I don't have to make a modern tie there, right? And that's why this is political philosophy, and connects to history and today, right? We love to look back into history, but we don't actually want to be that. We don't want to admire the historical characters, right? But we don't want to. You're telling me I have to actually have virtue, imitate their virtue? That's the big thesis of this book. We're going to study Livy, and he loves to use lots of modern and ancient historical examples. So this is a great history book too. And he gets into it like we have to do both. He says, more so when I see that the civic disputes which arise between citizens in the diseases men get, they always have recourse to decisions laid down by the ancients and to prescriptions they drew up. For the civil law is nothing but a collection of decisions made by jurists of old, which the jurists of today have tabulated in early fashion for our instruction. So it's all these experiments of these people from the past. So if we want to use their laws, we should probably be virtuous like them too. He says, let's see, finally he says, and he basically says, forming an army and conducting war when dealing with subjects and extending the empire, one finds neither prince nor republic who repairs antiquity for examples. So princes and republics just forget history. Now, this is 500 years ago. This should make you feel good. Our current problem of education and knowledge and the lack of knowledge of the past, it's a human problem. We're not special, everybody. The Italians ran into the same freaking problem 500 years ago. This is humanity. This is the constant struggle against entropy. He says, this is due, in my opinion, not so much to the weak state of which the religion of today is brought to the world, or the evil wrought by many provinces and cities of Christendom by ambition, but as to the proper appreciation of history, owing to people failing to realize the significance of what they read. They can't analyze it, right? And to their having no taste in the delicacies it comprises. So people study history without that. Just they're not tasting it, right? They're not understanding how to apply it. And that's what I hope to help us with here, right? If we can somehow get Machiavelli's principles. And remember, after the Renaissance, Italy was shattered for 500 years. They did not rise again. And you can argue now they're working on it. So if we can learn anything from them, it might not be a bad idea. Here we go. And then, so he says, hence it comes about that the great bulk of those who read it take pleasure in hearing of the various incidents which are contained in it, but never think of imitating them, since they hold them to not be merely difficult, but impossible of imitation. So remember, we can imitate the past. We can learn from history. But remember, not just understand the dates and the names. I hate that part of history. Like, oh, we just name dates and, serial numbers. It's like, no. What happened? Why did they do it? What was their motivation? What caused it? What virtues did they have that equipped them? Right? These are the good questions we should be asking as anybody. But this is the justification for why history should exist. And finally, this is still the preface, by the way. It's Wonderful Things. So that's why this is basically why the tradition matters and why civil law matters. I got too excited. I totally forgot I spent all this effort making a PowerPoint. Okay, and finally, like we talked about, they admire it, but they never imitate it. This is the big critical point I want you guys to take away from what this book is trying to do and why we should study it. If you never read it and you just listen to my nice late night voice, this is me now trying to wake up my kids. And my air conditioning's off and everything. They have nice audio quality, yeah. But we need to imitate the past, good examples from the past. This is the point of history. This is why we study it. Why would you want to ignore it and just try to figure it out yourself? We don't have that much processing speed. It's impossible. We need good examples, then we need to imitate them. And finally, that's the point of this. He wants to help men out of wrong. Help men out of wrong thinking. It's now that I don't have an audience, I don't have to rush it as much. But since I want to get men out of this wrong way of thinking, I have thought it fit to write a commentary on all those books of Titus Livy, which have not by the malignity of time had their continuity broken. So he goes into Livy, a Latin author basically. And it's both an analysis, but it's also a foil for his own ideas, right? It gives him kind of a defense, as it were. So very, very intriguing. So hopefully you're already into this. I know I am. I'm afraid to check how long I've already been talking. 10 minutes of slide. That's good. With my little intro, I feel pretty good about this. I'll do a couple of these tonight. I'm going to finish whatever I prepped. Why not? This is my fun day stream. I'm doing this for me. All right. And right away, right, this is why I love Machiavelli, man. He does not pull any punches. He just jumps right in. Best forms of government. And this is Book 1, Chapter 1. And it's titled is, I paraphrase it, but it's concerning the origin of cities in general and Rome in particular. So Rome for the West, right, but specifically for Italians, Rome is the greatest glory, right? That's what they look back to with reverence and remembrance. And in a lot of ways, we all do. Being descended from mostly people who burned Rome, though, I still teach it, but a little bit of me is like, hey, we did it, So, but still, I think there's admirable things of Rome, and we'll see them here too. St. Augustine also agrees in the City of God, by the way. Okay. And I'll read this introduction paragraph. I didn't mark it, but I should. He says, "Those who read of the origins of the city of Rome, of its legislatures and its constitution, will not be surprised that in this city such great virtue was maintained for so many centuries, and that later on there came into being an empire into which that republic developed." What's the implication here, right? They kept their virtue, which has a connection to their success. And then we get right into how do these communities form, right? If we're going to talk about best government, how do we even get to government? This first one's dealing with origin, basically. And let me see here. He basically says there's small communities. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but and communities are small, and they're not strong enough to resist any invaders. So there's no time for them to unite once the enemy show up. So they basically, hence to escape these dangers, either of their own accord or at the suggestion of someone greater authority than them, such communities undertake to live together in some place they have chosen in order to live more conveniently and more easily defend themselves. Logical, but also every following political author basically bases their natural law theory on Machiavelli. It's very interesting. Okay, next. He gives two examples, Athens and Venice. So he'll do this the whole book, but I'll paraphrase these. So Athens was built under the authority of one man for the inhabitants who were dispersed. Venice was Roman refugees, if you didn't know this. They were escaping the wars which daily arose in Italy after the decline of the Roman Empire. Without any particular persons or prince to give them a constitution, they began to live as a community under laws, which seemed to be appropriate for their maintenance. So, the cities form in different ways. Like Athens was an agreement, Venice was desperation, right? But you still form and you start to make laws. Again, how? By agreement, right? And obviously, Machiavelli assumes you're not dumb. What I mean is, there's like blank slate theory or like social contract theory. They were Romans, right? What kind of laws did they make? They used the Roman legal code, right? Roman assumptions. And let's be honest, they're Christians too. So Christian assumptions. I'm not afraid to say it. I have literally a picture of Christ here, right? Machiavelli's assumptions are still very Catholic. They're very humanist Catholic in a lot of ways and practical. But his base assumptions are still Catholic. So when you hear good, think what the Catholic good is, which implies getting close to God and all of his good attributes, right? So that's still a thing that happens here. Of course, he also has to mention the second case, which is cities built of men by a foreign race. Now, what does this mean? They are either free men or men of dependent on others, as they are the colonies sent out either by a republic or prince to relieve their towns of some of the population, or for the defense of newly acquired territory, which they desire to hold securely without expense. The Romans built a bunch of these cities, by the way. Did I leave it on here? I didn't. But they're sent out. I said forced out. That's not strictly true. But they're free cities built by people who are colonists, right? They're from another nation or peoples, and they go to a new place. Romans often wiped out cities and did this. Same thing with Alexandria. Right? Alexander built a Greek city in Egypt. So this is a very common strategy. And if you've ever read The Prince, this is his number one strategy for if a prince wants to hold a foreign conquest, move your own people there. And as he mentions, right, overpopulation. It's very common to send your people out. The ancients were leery of too large of cities. They knew that, again, there's going to be a political joke, but after Corona and the elections, right, they knew the risk of over large cities for sure. All right. And this one's really funny. What is a free city? I like this. He goes into it. He says, free cities are those which are built by peoples who, either under a prince or their own accord, are driven by pestilence or famine or war to abandon the land of their birth and look for new habitations. So I did actually know that it's on my slide. I actually did skip. Right, there's cities built by community, foreign race, and then this one is the third one. I was correct. Free cities by people who are forced out of their homeland. And these cities they find in countries they have occupied, in which they go to dwell, like Moses, or cities which they build, as Aeneas did. In this case, the virtue of the builder is discernible in the fortune of what was built. Literally, the virtue of the man who founds the city matters. Like the character goes down into their descendants. This virtue shows itself in two ways. First, in the choice of a site, and secondly, in the drawing up of his laws. And we're getting a hint here. The end of this chapter, this first chapter we're in, will eventually turn back around and go towards the only way to reform a republic is by autocracy. So the foundation of any republic requires drawing down of laws and picking a good site. And I love that he makes first the argument for why you should pick a bad site. So since men work either for necessity or by choice, and since there is found to be greater virtue where their choice has less to say into it, the question arises whether it would not be better to choose a barren place, which to build cities that men would have to be industrious and less given to idleness, and would be more united because, owing to the poor situation, there would be less occasion for discourse. He mentions as happened in Ragusa and many other cities. So if you build in a harder place, you make stronger men automatically. So like the environment naturally helps you keep virtue in the people. You'll be poor, right? And you have to be industrious. And you won't be able to be idle, but there's an upside to that too. So picking a hard place has its merit. And if you're going to pick a more... and he mentions this can only work. He says, such choice would undoubtedly be wiser and more advantageous were men content to earn their own living and not anxious to lord over others. So the character of the people you're working with matter. And this is going to be a big theme throughout Discourses. Character and virtue matter, and how you keep them through the generations. If you can't do it, form of government's irrelevant. I was talking to somebody today, and we were talking about the fact that corporations or states are dead. They're nothing without the people and the virtue of the people who run them. And Machiavelli was aware of this 500 years ago, of course. All right. And if you take nice land, which he admits is the bigger temptation, right? Because he mentions going to very fertile places. The fruitful in the land, it's possible to both defend themselves and attack and overcome an enemy who stand in the way of the city's greatness. But it also leads to idleness, which we already talked about, right? Of course it does. So it must be provided for by laws that you need to work in the situation does not impose. So if you live in a place where the climate doesn't keep you from being idle and keep you disciplined, you have to make laws that do that. He says, and then you should follow the example of those wise folk who have dwelt in the most beautiful and fertile land. So, in beautiful fertile land, he says, quote, tends to produce idleness and ineptitude for training virtue of any kind, and who, in order to obviate disasters with such idleness induced by amenities of land might cause, have imposed the need for training on those who have become soldiers, and have made this training such as the men who have become better soldiers than those countries which are rough and sterile by nature. And he gives the example of the Egyptians, and this is pretty much through history. The Greek Egyptians, when Alexander conquered it, but also the Turks and the Mamluks. If you don't know the Mamluks, he mentions how famous they were for training. They were Muslims, slave soldiers actually, who conquered Egypt, and they disciplined really hard. And the Turks, right? The Turks are famous for fighting. And then it is, but he says, and again, his conclusion, I maintain that it is more prudent to place a city in a fertile situation, provided its fertility is kept in due bounds by laws. There's a fun anecdote here where he mentions Alexander the Great wants to build Alexandria, and his architect says, let's build it on Mount Athos. Like the character of that makes the best humans, but then Alexander the Great says, like, where are the humans going to live? And the guy's name is Dinocrates. Dinocrates is like, I don't know. I just wanted to make a city that's worthy of the conqueror of the world. They didn't build there. They built it in Egypt. It was a very cushy city. It said, Alexander laughed, and leaving the mountain load, built Alexandria, where inhabitants would be glad to live. I love it. And final point here. Let's see. Do I have it on here? He goes in Roman virtue one more time. They also recognize, as we should presently point out, under what strict discipline was placed by the laws made by Romulus, Numa, and others, and that in consequence neither its fertile situation, nor the convenience accorded by the sea, its frequent victories, nor the greatness of his empire, were for many centuries able to corrupt it. But these laws that kept it so rich in virtue, that there has never been any other city or any other republic so well adorned. So again, we're getting back to that core theme here, where virtue obviously makes a difference. All right, time to sip my late night tea. All right, and let me see what we shall see. Okay, we're doing fine. Good. All right, another great picture from Venice. That is a sculpture, by the way, if you're worried about seeing boobs, I guess. This one is, how many kinds of states are there, and of what kind was that of Rome? So he wants to discuss cities, right? And he says, we shall speak only of those that have been free of external servitude. And he says, we'll start from the start have been governed in accordance with their own wishes, whether as republics or principalities. So even those books about republics, kind of, it's not exclusively about republics. It's exclusively about free societies that have never had external servitude. What's the point here? It changes the nature of the compact, right? It's not none of this principle would apply. We just basically, if it's a subservient society, go to the prince, which is a much shorter book. And you can argue today, whenever somebody compares a subservient modern society to a free modern society, like it manages its own affairs, there's no comparison to be made. It's something I think Machiavelli would definitely argue. Okay. So then we go into the best state, in Machiavelli's opinion, is, and he says, happy is a state that can continually make good men through laws. And he says, let me quote him directly, happy indeed should we call that state which produces a man so prudent that men can live securely under the laws which he prescribes without having to amend them. And the best example of this, Sparta. Sparta lasted 800 years without corrupting their laws and without any dangerous disturbance. Pretty good, right? Reorganized states, on the other hand, he says, unhappy on the other hand, or some degree, the cities which deem which, after having chanced to meet with a prudent organizer, reorganized itself. Reorganization almost always goes badly. So a strong founding with good laws, and then keeping those laws, that seems to be the best way to go. It says, it's almost impossible that this type of state, the one that reforms itself, should by any eventuality be set to the right road again. And basically, is it compared to something that has a good beginning and can improve? So, oops. Yeah, so don't reorganize your laws heavily. If you don't have a good founding, you have to restart it, basically. That's his opinion. And he gives a bunch of examples of this. Now we finally get to what are the three kinds of states. Talking both of Rome and in general. He says here, there's three forms of government. He calls them principality, aristocracy, democracy. And those who set the government in any particular state must adopt one of them that best suits their purpose. And by the way, here, when he says states, the Italian is Repubblice, so it's republic. So when I say republic, in a Machiavellian sense, he means a free, virtuous government. That's what he means. That's the point. So it could be a principality or an aristocracy or a democracy. They could all be republics in a Machiavellian sense. All right. Now he does address the Trad Six. I call them the Trad Six because this is all adapted from Aristotle, Aristotle's Politics. So basically, it's traditionally thought the worst of the best is the worst. So tyranny is a corruption of principality, oligarchy is a corruption of aristocracy, anarchy is the corruption of democracy. And does he have anything I think you want to add here? He says, yeah, so Commonwealth set up the first three forms of government, the good ones. And then there's by no means whereby prevent it passing to its contrary on account of the likeness, which case virtue has to vice. So think about it like this is the virtuous state, this is the vice-filled state. So they're mirrors of each other. That's basically his theory. Again, we're back to virtue, right? Virtue matters here. And again, if we're going through a crisis of virtue right now, this is the time for this, right? Virtue is necessary for the running of any human organization. If it's not there, what are you going to do? Right? Is it just beating each other over the head in power? Yeah, but that eats itself. It's demonstrable. And he will also provide many demonstrations. Okay, and then through here he goes through kind of the evolution of this, how this adapted over time. He says, yeah, they're due to chance. For at the beginning of the world, men were scattered and they started to collect. So, and then he points this out. So first they picked courageous men when they're in nature, right? They need to be able to defend themselves, so they pick a courageous leader, and they learn how to distinguish what is honest and good from what is pernicious and wicked. Remember, we're talking Christian wicked, so that's the standard we're applying here. And as humans went on, they figured the standard out more. So, and to prevent evils, they took to making laws and to the assigning of punishments to those who contravene them. The notion of justice thus came into being. And then we get more of this kind of evolution as we go. So, and then eventually that brave man, right, it becomes later they had to choose a prince. They did not have recourse to the boldest as formerly, but then they choose one who's prudent and just. So they start to understand what prudence and justice is. So they don't just choose on boldness, they choose on prudence. But eventually, the hereditary nature of it, his heirs soon began to degenerate compared to their ancestors. Forsaking virtuous deeds, consider that princes have naught else to do, but surpass other men in extravagance, lasciviousness, and every other form of licentiousness. So eventually princes degrade. And then that leads, before long, it falls into a tyranny, and then there's plots against him. But they're not timid and weak men, but by men conspicuous for their, quote, liberality, magnanimity, wealth, and ability. So this is how we then get to the masses support these powerful leaders, then we get aristocracy. And they mention here, it works, is fine, as long as aristocracy rules in accordance with the laws which they have made, subordinated to their own convenience, to the common advantage, of both private matters and public affairs. Govern, preserve the order with the utmost diligence. But they pass it to their descendants. Yeah, we're not going to keep going yet. And then the same problem happens again, right? Instead of remaining content with civic equality then prevailing, reverted to avarice, ambition, and seizing other men's womenfolk. Never do that. And caused the government to be an aristocracy, which became a government of an oligarchy, in which civic rights were entirely disregarded. That sounds familiar, right? So again, once the aristocracy subverts those rights, we start this process again. And so now, that leads to the people basically taking over. Okay, and let's see here. And then he says, this is then the cycle through which all commonwealths pass. Did I want to say anything about? He says, since all governments to their extent respect to the outset, democratic form of government maintained itself for a while, but not for long, especially when the generations that had organized it had passed away. For anarchy quickly supervened, to which no respect was shown for either the individual or the official, in which such that everyone did as he liked, all sorts of outrages were constantly committed. The outcome was inevitable, either at the suggestion of some good man, or because this anarchy had got rid of it somehow, principality was once again restored, and from this there was, stage by stage, a return to anarchy, by the way of the transition and the reasons assigned. There we go. The cycle starts again. History is not progressive. It is cyclical, including government forms. That is Machiavelli's claim. And I think history basically agrees with him. So then he goes down to basically this, then the cycle through which all commonwealths go. The problem is that why isn't this always cyclical? I'll stay here for a second. He points out you eventually get conquered by your neighbor, and then you're part of their cycle. And maybe if you get lucky someday, you reestablish yourself. But more common, once you hit anarchy, somebody else takes you over. Remember, folks, things don't always end the way you think they're going to end. And then he says, I maintain then that all the forms of government mentioned above are far from satisfactory. Edgy, I like it. The 3 good ones, because their life is short. The 3 bad ones, because of their inherent malignity. Hence, prudent legislators aware of their defects refrain from adopting any one of these forms and choose instead that chose instead one that shared in them all, since they thought the government would be stronger and more stable. And if none of the same state, there was a principality, aristocracy, and democracy which keep watch over the other. So you need the perfect republic would have elements of all 3 of these watching over each other, and it's not like separate but equal branches. It's literally you have like an aristocratic branch, and a monarchical principality branch, and a plebeian, like a regular people branch. And he mentions real life examples here of failure. He mentions Sparta, again, 800 years of tranquility. Did pretty good. He gives Athens as the counterexample. Athens couldn't maintain laws to save its life, right? And they collapsed quickly as soon as they became a democracy. And he said, let us come to Rome. So Rome had just their senatorial republic was 300 years. I think they were a kingdom for another 300, and an empire for 400 to 1,500 years, depending on who you ask. So there's something in the magic of Rome that he's trying to tap here. And his final comment on, he thinks the point that makes his argument the strongest is the stability that comes from Rome is what you should be looking at. And he says, this way the tribune of the plebs came to be appointed. Their appointment did, or I should point this out. I want to read this actually, hold on. He just explains the historical process here. But he says, eventually there came when the Roman nobility became so overbearing for reasons which will be given later that the populace rose against them, and they were constrained by the fear that they might lose it all to grant the populace a share of the government, the Senate and the consuls retaining, however, sufficient authority for them to be able to maintain their position in the republic. It was in this way that the tribune of the plebs came to be appointed, and by their appointment did much to stabilize the form of government of the republic. For in its government all 3 estates now had a share. So the tribune of plebs gave the plebeians, they voted for them, they gave them like a veto. They're almost like a regular person Caesar, who could but also a judge. Like they had executive authority, but they could bring court cases, and they could advocate for the plebs. All right. Exciting. Do I want to do the next one? I mean, I'm already on a roll. Let me double check what I got there. 1 second, everybody. Here we go. The last one's fun. I'll cover this one really quick. Yeah, why not? I'll cover this one really quick because I think it's the good concluding point to all of this. All right, finally. Now we get to the section 3, which is what kind of events gave rise to the tribune of the plebs. It says, whenever you're making a commonwealth, I love this. I'm going to read it real quick. When legislating and constituting a commonwealth, it must needs be taken for granted that all men are wicked, and that they will always give vent to malignity that is in their minds when opportunity offers. Evil dispositions do not show themselves for a time, is due to hidden cause, which those fail to perceive. We have no experience of the opposite. But in time, which it is said to be the father of all truth, reveals itself. So, men are evil. Again, this is a fundamental Christian assumption, right? You cannot trust men just by the good of their hearts. And it mentions too, men never do good unless necessity drives them to it. But when they are too free to choose and can just do as they please, confusion and disorder become everywhere rampant. And he says, hence it is said, this is a good phrase, that hunger and poverty make men industrious, and laws make them good. So there we go. Is there any other thing I want to mention here? No. We'll get into the discord between the Senate and the plebs that made Rome more free and powerful. This is a big claim. He basically claims here that the kind of conflict between the Senate, which was the aristocracy, and then the plebeians made that Rome better. What's the versions of this we get? Well, firstly, he points out that part of the argument here can be made. I am always deny that fortune and military organization had a good deal to do with Rome's empire, but it seemed to me this view fails to take account for the fact that where military organization is good, there needs to be good order, and that rarely does that happen, that good fortune does not accompany it. So Rome was good at military, but they got that from somewhere. It didn't pop out of the ground, right? It came from the order of their society. And then, and this conflict between the two classes was the primary method for Rome keeping its freedom. And he mentions people tend to pay attention to the noise and clamor, and instead of the good effects that's produced by the noise and clamor. Just because you have a conflict in your society doesn't mean it's naturally bad. But it's what to what end. And for this one, it's preserving freedom. And he says, he gives a good advance of how we keep virtue. He said that generally speaking, the tumults of Rome rarely led to banishment, nor can republic reasonably be stigmatized in any way as disorder in which there occur striking examples of virtue, since good examples proceed from good education from good laws, and good laws, in this case, from those very tumults, there we go, which many so inconsiderately condemn, for anyone who studies carefully the result will not find that they occasioned any banishment or act of violence inimical to the common good. So banishment violence is fine if it's for the common good anyway. And it led to laws and institutions whereby liberties of the public benefited. And what's my conclusion here? And here he points this out, right? The demands of a free populace, too, are very seldom too harmful to liberty, for it is due to either their ignorance, either due to the populace being oppressed, or the suspicion it's going to be oppressed, that should the impressions be false, the remedy is provided in the public platform, on which some man of standing may get up, appeal to the crowd, and show that it is mistaken. So there's a certain respect for a good crowd, a moral group of people here, which he's trying to imply. And this will be the end of it, but basically, just because there's conflict doesn't mean there's not virtue, right? What is the conflict towards matters. And generally, it's good. A free populace, a moral free populace, is less harmful to liberty if it's properly educated. That's what he's saying. And not educated like we think now, like book education, but morally educated. So this is more of a religious, moral sense he's talking about. So, again, he's making this link between Rome's might and its virtue, but also its conflict between these classes. So the threat of the plebs always kept the Senate in check, basically. And again, you could argue this is happening in the United States right now. So, fun. I had a little less elaboration on this slide. This went a little longer than I expected, but that was fun. All right, folks, that is my first dry run of Machiavelli's Discourses. I didn't get as far as I read, which is totally fine. But let me know if you guys like this. If there's interest, I will keep doing more of these. I'll at least finish the first book. First section of the first book, anyway. But if there's more interest, please post, let me know. I hope you liked it. This is the first time I've wrestled with Machiavelli teaching. Reading and teaching are totally different beasts, so I'm trying to wrestle with him and understand his ideas and explain them well. So this should get better as we go. Yeah, so thank you all so much. I appreciate you paying attention. Hopefully you'll join me again soon. Bye-bye now.